Today I'm going to play with watercolors. These are just cheapy watercolors from Walmart, kid set, no problem. If you're an experienced watercolor painter, you're gonna, know what you're doing. I'm just playing a little bit with a few different watercolor techniques to make some interesting papers that I'm going to use in mixed media. I'm going to use a variety of brushes and show you a few little techniques. I'm just working on little scraps of watercolor paper because I always have scraps as I'm cutting things down. First thing I'm going to do is use Frisket or masking fluid. So this is how watercolor painters leave areas of white. And so I'm going to shake up my Frisket. I'm going to take a very thin, skinny little brush, and I'm going to trace some of these circles onto plain watercolor paper. Frisket or masking fluid is going to go onto the watercolor paper. I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to apply watercolor over it, and when the paint is dry, I will peel off the Frisket, and you'll see the white watercolor paper behind it. So I'm just going around the edges of these circles. I know you can't see because it's white on white. That one I'm filling in. So I'm going to set that aside and let the Frisket dry. You can see the circles a little bit there. Set that aside. The next thing I'm going to do is play with salt. And I'm going to do a wet on wet application of some watercolor. So I'm going to wet my brush and wet my paper. More water on the brush. And I'm going with black. Wet on wet is going to give you some really great movement of the colors around your paper. And you can keep adding to darken it up if you'd like. And then while it's still wet, I'm going to take coarse salt. This is coarse sea salt. You can see I'm going to sprinkle it in the wet watercolor. Lightly in some areas, a little heavier in other areas. And then I'm going to set that aside to dry. I'm going to do another wet on wet. Use some different brushes. Let me clean the black brush. And what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to spritz some water on the paper. And I'm going to try some different brushes here, doing wet on wet. Letting the watercolor kind of flow. And I'm going to take a fan brush. with some purple. I love how that flows. And another brush. And let's do a different blue. I'm already thinking about the collage I'm going to make with these papers, so I'm trying to keep it all cool colors. Some my blues and my purples. A little more water here. Watch how it flows. A little more paint. And just paint drops into the water, and you get this movement as it blends and moves. My paper's warping, but once the watercolor's dry, I'll flatten that out. All right, this one I'm just going to let dry as is. We'll come back to it. Let me see. Another brush. I'm going to dry brush this. So I've got a little bit of water on my brush, a little bit in the palette. But that definitely gives a different look. So a little bit of water. No water on the paper. And the more you play, the more you can start to control or, have a planned lack of control with your watercolors. You can blend some. And I'm going to set that one aside to dry as well. One more. I'm going to do wet on wet. I'm going to spritz this with water. And just kind of let the paint go where it wants to. A couple different colors. A little bit darker blue, and I'm gonna get a bit of water there and do some drips. I'm just touching the water slightly with my brush, letting it blend and move around. So that's kind of fun. What I'm going to add to this is I'm going to take some black India ink. While this is all still kind of wet, I'm just going to take a skewer, a wooden skewer from the kitchen, and drop some of that ink into the wet watercolor and let it move around. See how it spreads out? And I'm also going to just add some lines, maybe connecting the blobs. And I'm looking at these as, something I might use in collage. And so little bits that I can cut out that will be interesting. And some more lines in this area. Okay. I'm going to set that one aside. And I'm going to dry this off a bit. And I'm going to come back to my frisket. So my frisket is pretty dry. And I'm going to apply watercolor over the frisket. And it acts like a resist. So when the paint itself is dry, I'll come back and I'll peel off that frisket and leave a white area there. So I'm going to let all of these dry a bit, and then we'll move on to the next steps. All right, and we're back, and I think these are all dry. One thing I remembered that I don't like about watercolor is how long it takes to dry sometimes. So first off, I'm going to go back to the one I put the frisket on, and once the watercolor is dry, I'm just going to peel that off. It's a gummy kind of substance that you can just roll off with your fingers. And there we have it, using the frisket and watercolor. Got another one I did earlier as well that I'm going to peel the rest. Oops. That's what I'm talking about. Doesn't dry real quickly. So still go ahead and peel that frisket off. So these two I used frisket, masking fluid, and watercolor. Then we've got the salt. And you can see that the salt kind of leaves dark spots around it. You really want to dry this well. I started to peel some of the salt off and it was still wet underneath. So with a light touch, I'm just going to get all of that salt off the surface. You certainly don't want salt falling off of your piece after you put it together. So I'm just brushing this off lightly. Some of it is a little bit wet still, which is crazy because I let it dry for a couple hours. But this is the effect you get with the salt. I love those darker spots where the salt crystals went. And I've got another one over here that I got most of the salt off, and the paint wasn't quite dry. So the next thing I want to do is some of these wet on wet, where I combined different colors, like going in with a real fine micron pen and just kind of outlining some of these fun little edges. Add some definition between the colors. You can do some of them, all of them. It's entirely up to you. But it kind of adds another dimension to the wet on wet watercolor and our little mixtures of color. So this is a number 1 pen, and so gives me quite defined lines. If I go narrower, this is a 0.02, so this is a really thin pen. And go in here and again go around these fun edges. It almost feels like drawing a map, picking which ones you're going to outline. So you can see the very fine 0.02 and then the 1.0. So what I'm going to do now is take my little watercolor experiments and I'm going to use them to create a collage. All right, for this mini collage, I have a piece of 5" by 5" 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. And I think instead of just using these watercolor pieces, I'm going to start with another piece of paper and add to that. So I've got a piece here with some handwriting on it. And I'm going to glue that down. I'm using soft gel matte medium because I want something that's a little more heavy duty than a glue stick to hold down the heavy watercolor paper that I've just used for my watercolor experiments. So I'm going to start with this piece of paper here. And then I'm going to add some of these watercolor pieces. I like that section, so I'm going to cut. like that. And I'm going to tear this part. And of course, with adding watercolor paper, I'm going to have a thicker paper with white edges. So what I'm going to do is hit those edges with a stamp pad. Probably along these edges as well, so I don't see the white paper. Okay. And really like the way that one turned out. I think I'll do something with circles. Surprise, surprise. But not that one. Maybe. I think I will. So I want a straight edge, not a full complete circle. Like that. Okay. And of course I have circles with my, that I used for the frisket, so I like those. Like that. I'm going to cut that edge. And then I just have some plain colors. Got some ink blobs. And I've got some, a little bit of writing around the colors I like. Kind of like that. Maybe another circle. Just tore out this part of the letter. It says Home Sweet Home. Let me put that on top. And then something else in the background. Maybe a bit of text behind there. Something there. I'll mix it up a little. Not all circles. I'll put a rectangle there. Maybe something like that. All right, I'm going to glue that down without talking and give you a speed through.